Welcome to the Down South Hunting Podcast. I'm Adam Cruz with Mike Higman, and this is part one of a three-part series on scent control. If this is your first time listening in, we thank you for joining in. Just to give you a little introduction, this podcast focuses in on hunting in the South. We talk about deer hunting, turkey hunting. We have material really, though, that is for everyone, because Mike and I are not just sharing our knowledge. We're interviewing industry leaders, whether that's biologists, top hunters around the country, like what you're going to hear from today. We just get into a little bit of everything, but we do try to focus our efforts on Southern hunting. This week is a little different because we normally chat in the beginning. We talk about what's going on in our lives. We talk about how we're prepping for deer season or whatever hunting season might be coming up. But this week, we're going to jump right into the show. First, if you haven't subscribed yet, please go to iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you're at, however you're listening to this podcast, and hit the subscribe button. Leave us a review. Be honest. We really appreciate it. And don't forget to follow us on social media. I'm going to pass this over to Mike, and he's going to give us a little bit of an agenda for this episode, the rest of the series, and a little background about how this call got put together.
Adam, I'm really excited. We're finally getting this episode out for everybody. We've had these interviews done for a little bit, and we needed to do a little bit of editing to put it in a good format. But like you said earlier, we're doing these episodes on scent control. We got Dan Infalt, the big buck serial killer, and we got John Eberhart, the Michigan legend. These guys are both known for killing mature bucks on highly pressured public land year after year. We interviewed these guys separately. But we're going to blend these interviews into one. Or the original plan was to interview them both together, and it quickly became evident that that was not going to go well. We quickly would have become the Jerry Springer show. These guys are both passionate about what they believe and have had a ton of success with it. So what we decided to do is interview them separate and blend them together through some editing. We don't have any agendas in this editing, so we're not trying to push one side or the other. We just want to put all the facts out there so everybody can decide on their own how they feel about scent control. There's not going to be a declared winner at the end. We just want you to hear both opinions and decide for yourself. So what we're going to do is we have 3 different podcasts going to be released over the next couple weeks. Obviously, this one has been edited. We still have some things to do on the next couple. If you're subscribed or you follow us on social media, you should find out about those, and you'll know once they're out. So let's just go ahead and get into the interviews. We're going to start asking Dan some questions, and we're going to jump back and forth. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening. Dan, as a hunter who for the most part was self-taught, how did you get started?
Well, just going out and diving in and trying. At first it was about killing deer, and I think it is for most people. It's about trying to kill that first deer. Then it's about trying to kill a buck, and then it's trying to kill a bigger buck. And sooner or later, it becomes easy, and you keep up in the game,
How many years did it take before you maybe started killing mature deer?
It took a real big buck moving into the area that I hunted. You got to remember, when I grew up, there wasn't very many big bucks. One showed up, and it was usually, deer didn't make it much after a year and a half old. If you got a 2-year-old, people would be patting you on the back in July going, "Hey, I heard you got a buck last November." So when that big one showed up, it really started a fire in me that I wanted to get it, and I hunted that deer down. It took me a few seasons, and then every year after that, I've shot big bucks.
Wow, and how long ago was that?
That was back in the 80s.
John, can you start out by telling us how you got involved in hunting?
Well, I started by walking by an archery shop in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Nobody in my family hunted, so I didn't have any mentors, and I was walked in this shop, and the owner of the shop was shooting a bow, and back then it was the old PA round, so shooting at a 3-inch bullseye at 20 yards, and he was hitting it every time. And he was the only guy in the shop other than me. And I asked him I said, "Do you deer hunt?" And I was 13 years old. I was just a kid. And he said, yeah, I deer hunt. And I said, "Man, you must kill a lot of deer." And he said, "Son, I've shot at 6 deer in my life. And back then there wasn't a lot of deer in southern Michigan. He said, I've shot at 6 deer in my life, and I've yet to hit the first one, and they were all closer than that target down there. So I was like, why? And he said, when I see deer, I just get so excited, I just lose it, and I miss. And this guy was draining this 3-inch bullseye at 20 yards. And every deer he shot at under 20 yards, he never touched one of them. So that kind of intrigued me, and I was always into whitetails. In school we talked about deer hunting. There's other kids that deer hunted and stuff, and so that always intrigued me, and that kind of got me into it. And I just started going with this guy that I knew that was like 35 years old, snaggletooth guy named Leroy, and he was a pretty good bow hunter, but he was my only way of getting any place because he had a vehicle, and obviously I didn't have a driver's license yet. So he took me out and we hunted public land, and I just kind of learned as I went. And I think that's the best way to do it, because when you're mentored by older people in the family, you learn their methods, and they're typically relatively generic. And so when you learn by yourself and you have a desire to get better and improve, and you love the challenge, you learn from your mistakes and you move forward, and that's kind of the way I've done it.
Well, that's pretty cool. That guy Leroy got you started in it. It seems like, taking it out. I'm sure he never knew he was.
It was cool. I shot my first bow was a 40 or 45 pound Ben Pearson. I think it was 62-inch recurve, and I didn't own a compound until 1975. That was my first compound. That was a Bear Polar 2. And trust me, with my recurve, I missed more deer than I hit. But I did kill some now and then. And by the mid-70s, I was pretty decent at killing the bigger bucks in the area. And back then, Michigan had 1 million gun hunters, and, nobody passed up any antlered buck. So 2.5-year-old bucks were extremely rare. So typically a 2.5-year-old buck was about as good as they got. 14-inch, 95-inch 8-point was a monster buck back in those days. And I'm going back into the, late 60s, early 70s.
Let's get into these guys' scent control tactics. We'll start with Dan. What tactics do you personally use to beat a deer's nose when you're hunting?
The wind. The wind and milkweed. I think people raise an eyebrow to my scent control tactics because there are none. I don't even buy scent-free soaps. I wash with regular soap. I use regular shampoo. What I do is I play the wind. You'd probably be shocked to find out that a lot of my big bucks were shot out of my hunting clothes. My work clothes. In a lot of cases, my work boots. And I work in a machine shop full of oil and smoke all day long. The whole thing is you got to realize that deer smell you, and you got to play the wind, and you got to watch how you access your areas.
Can you give us an idea of maybe how you've developed your ability to use the wind? Is that something that you've always done, or maybe when you first started you didn't even realize the wind was important? How did that go?
Well, you learn pretty quick that wind's important. I think a big stepping point for me was starting to use milkweed. And people really don't understand the importance of that. They kind of roll your eyes and think you're cheap. You don't want to buy a puff bottle or something. But really, milkweed is very important because it follows the air currents. And what it has taught me is things that, kind of revolutionized a lot of things in hunting. Things like water thermals. I've never heard anybody else talk about water thermals until I brought them up. And the reason I know what water thermals are is because of milkweed. I watched the air suck to the water and rise. Milkweed has taught me how wind spins in an opening in a forest and how not to sit up in that opening. It shows me how to set up off to the side. Milkweed shows me what wind does when it goes over the top of trees and hits an opening. It shows me what it does when it hits a wall of trees on an angle. You learn so much about wind that you can start predicting it just by using that tool.
So we got a bunch of guys from the South listening to the podcast, and hopefully with this episode, we're going to have hunters from all over. Can you kind of give us a quick rundown of exactly what milkweed is? Because I know before I started reading and watching some of your stuff, I didn't even know what milkweed was.
Yeah, I'm not positive you guys have it down here. I get a lot of questions from people down south about what milkweed is. Up here, it grows in the ditches. It grows in a pod. You dry the pod out, and it just happens to be perfect timing right about the time hunting season opens up here. Down by you guys, you could probably use thistle or something like that, the fluffy stuff. Cattail's a little heavy. I know there was a lot of guys on the huntingbeast.com that were sending people milkweed if they wanted it, if they paid the shipping. I'm sure there's a bunch of posts up there if somebody wants to try that.
I've got some of Dan Infalt's finest. I got some milkweed from you that I sent you some PayPal for shipping. So
there you go.
Hasn't killed me a bunch of big bucks yet, but I still got quite a bit left to make that come true. So
let's turn the tables here. How has milkweed helped you? I mean, you must see that what I'm saying about it once you tried it.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing in the areas I hunt, a lot of times, and I haven't figured out how to master this yet, but in the late evening, almost right before dark, I get a lot of times where there's actually, even you using the milkweed, there's actually almost no air current, where the stuff is dropping just about straight down, which I guess can be an advantage if they're not right underneath your stand.
Yeah, well, that's when milkweed shines, because a puff bottle will tell you wind direction, a piece of string will tell you wind direction, but when it gets calm, you can't see that air current unless you got something that floats real lightly like milkweed.
Well, it's pretty neat. Sometimes you'll drop it, and it'll float 10 yards away, 15 yards away, so you think, okay, the wind's going that way, and next thing you know, it comes back going by you, and then ends up behind you or something like that. So.
Yeah, I remember a hunt in Iowa dropping milkweed, and I was trying to get away with hunting down in the bottom where I know better. And I'm dropping this stuff thinking, okay, I'm getting away with this. It's all going this way. It's all going this way. And also I look down, and it's like it goes out at like 100 yards, goes down to the ground level, and there's a different air current. And I'm looking under my stand, and it's all floating back up the other way. So even though at my stand it's blowing the correct way, down at ground level it's not. And I'll tell you something else, too, with milkweed. You think that you get the wind in your face because every time there's a gust, it's in your face. Well, there's a difference between air currents and wind. And when it gets calm, the air current might be going the absolute opposite direction, but you can't feel it. That's where milkweed shines, and you can see it. And that's where people get that deer have a sixth sense thing, where all of a sudden it noticed I was there, but the wind was in my favor. Not really. He smelled you.
And I've done that where I do get winded. I always want to learn from the experience, so drop some milkweed, and I guess it was going that way. We're getting off track real quick here, but that's what I love about podcasts. You just talking about that reminded me of the story I've heard you tell about hunting on Andre's farm, and you actually, on a particular tree, you could only hunt it at a certain height. Do you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, that was a tree that I was hunting a real big 8-pointer down there, and we kind of figured out what ridge it was living on, or at least we had a educated guess that that's where it was. But with the leeward wind, it was really hard to hunt. It was really thick, and Andre had a preset stand there, and he had a hole cut to where the deer cruise on that ridge. And that stand, Andre said he kept getting busted in it because you're hunting above the deer, And he said that he would drop milkweed, and if he dropped it while sitting, it would go right down that hole he cut to the trail, no matter what. He says, but then standing up, he dropped some over his head, and it blew over the top of the woods. So he just moved his stand up 10 feet, and he never got busted there again. And he explained that to me, that's why his stand was so high. His stand was like 30 feet. But I climbed up that stand, and same thing. I mean, you could feel the air current blowing down in that hole. But when you got above it, it was blowing over. It's all about air currents.
John, can you summarize your strategy for us for beating a mature whitetail buck's nose on pressured public land?
Well, years ago, I hunted for 35 seasons hunting the wind, and basically when you hunt the wind it got to the point, like by the late 80s, where there was places I just wouldn't set up. I wouldn't set up in saddles. I wouldn't set up in corners of fields. I wouldn't set up on sides of ridges because thermals and wind currents and swirling winds would always get me. So it just got to the point where there was a lot of areas I quit hunting. And then there was also times when I'd have, rut phase locations, because 60% of P&Y bucks from every state in the country are killed during the rut phases. So obviously that's the time you want to key most of your time on, is during rut phases. So, during the rut phases which is a short period of time, some of my best rut phase locations I never got to hunt because the wind was wrong on the days that I had off where that I could hunt. So there was a lot of years my best locations didn't get hunted. So when ScentLock came out, I knew a lot about activated carbon at the time. I knew what activated carbon was. I knew that it was used by, hundreds of different industries and worldwide bodies for a lot of different absorptive and filtration purposes. But when a suit came out, when ScentLock came out with a suit, I honestly, I never thought there would be anything that could negate the wind. I just never ever thought that could be possible. And so I bought one, saved my money because I was very poor at the time. And it took me about 3 years to learn how to properly care for it and what to use in conjunction with it. You got to wear the jacket, you got to wear the pants, you got to wear rubber or neoprene, clean rubber or neoprene boots. You have to wear the head cover with the drop-down face mask. You have to have a clean backpack. You've got to do everything in conjunction with the ScentLock suit or it will not work. It's not a magic bullet where you buy a jacket and a pant and it just works. So you've got to do it all. But anyway, it took me about 3 years to learn how to properly care for it. And I didn't feel like the instructions that came on ScentLock's hang tags was sufficient. So I kind of developed my own process for caring for it. I eliminated the washing part. I think washing those suits multiple times is detrimental to their longevity. And it just got to the point after about 3 seasons where I started hunting and I just wasn't getting winded. And then I decided that first year where I was not getting winded whatsoever, I did some tests. I actually went out in the field and performed tests on where I knew I would see deer. And during one of them, it was during the October lull, so it was during a period where most of the mature bucks in the area were nocturnal, so I wasn't really hurting anything by doing a test. And I had this one location, and there was a runway 15 yards, and it was on public land, 15 yards, and then there was another runway 25 yards. And I was set up on the south side of these two runways at 15 and 25 yards. So I waited for a southerly wind where the wind was going to be blowing directly from me to those two runways. And I wasn't set up that high in this tree. I was probably 18 feet. And the first night I hunted it, I wore my ScentLock suit with the head cover, drop-down face mask, boots, washed my backpack in scent-free detergent. Everything was pristine. And a doe and two fawns came out on the 25-yard runway about an hour before dark, come out of the cedar swamp heading towards the hayfield. And when they got directly downwind of me, she didn't react whatsoever. She didn't put her nose up in the air. She just kept walking like nothing was going on and went out into that wheat field. And about a half hour later, a doe and a single fawn came on the 15-yard runway and did the same thing. Well, the next day, and these were evening hunts, by the way, the next day, the wind was out of the same direction, and I wore a mossy oak apparel, chamois, cotton, regular old camouflage suit.
Yeah.
And I sat in the same tree. Wind was out of the same direction. And when that doe came out, she came out almost at the exact same time. When she got downwind of me, I mean, her nose immediately went in the air. She turned and looked in my direction, and she started snorting and stomping her feet. She did that for probably, it seemed like 10 minutes, but it was probably 30 seconds. And then she turned and ran back into the cedar swamp, and took the fawns with her, and obviously because she was making such a commotion, the other doe and fawn never did come out. The ones that came out the night before at 15 yards.
Mm-hmm.
So that was probably my first good test. And then in 1999, 2 years later, I was perched about 18 feet up in a white oak tree, in this white oak had acorns. And I was using the same scent control regimen. And I had 3 mature does and 2 fawns saunter in and feed on acorns. And one of the does picked me. She visually picked me in the tree. And she's just looking, and I'm sure most of your listeners will know what I'm talking about. You know, she just looked at me and she tried to do the peekaboo thing. And finally, she started working around she worked around the tree. She actually left far enough away from the tree where there wasn't any acorns on the ground. And she went downwind of me about 15 yards. And she had her head in the air, nose in the air. She was trying to smell something. She was trying to win me, and she did not. And within 10 minutes, she came back and started feeding. And, those were my 2 first tests. And then I've had literally hundreds and hundreds of deer downwind of me. I've killed lots. I pay 0 attention to wind direction anymore. Wind direction is 100% irrelevant to me. The only time I look at a flag is if I'm feeling patriotic. I don't look at flags anymore to see what direction the wind's blowing while I'm driving someplace.
Why do you believe so strongly in activated carbon?
I already knew a lot about activated carbon before I ever bought a suit. And to assume hunting personalities, me included, and hunting companies always tell the truth when they're endorsing or advertising their product technologies, to me it's extremely naive for people to buy into that. Because I believe the scent elimination rhetoric by hunting companies wins the grand prize as the most deceptive. Because odor is something we can't smell, the trace amounts that a deer or a dog can. So they can say the companies can say whatever they want, and there's really no way of proving them different, and there's no policing agencies that are writing tickets if they're wrong. So unless they get sued, it doesn't mean anything. They can spew whatever rhetoric they want.
Right.
And basically, the technologies that are out there were not developed by the hunting industry. Hunting companies are very, very small in the scope of worldwide markets. And it costs $2 billion for a drug company to bring a drug to market. So activated carbon has been around since the mid-1800s. It's been used in tons and tons of stuff. It's used. Well, let me give you an idea of what it's used for. Okay. If anybody wants to Google activated carbon, here are a few of the 100 of absorptive applications that it's used for around the world.
I just wanted to drop a note in here. John gave us a comprehensive list of 25 plus different absorptive uses of activated carbon. And you can find those all in his book. Unfortunately, we had to cut those out due to time.
If you take an electron, nobody has an electron microscope, but under electron microscopic evaluations, if you took 1 tablespoon of activated coconut carbon particles, and that's what Sunlight uses is coconut carbon, and these particles, keep in mind, are smaller than a grain of sand. So if you took 1 tablespoon of these particles and you took all of the interior pores and the exterior surface and you flattened it out onto on a flat surface, all that surface area from 1 tablespoon would cover 3.5 football fields. Now, if you took a 1 pound, just a little 1 pound butter tub, everybody knows what a 1 pound butter tub is, of the same particles, and you did the same thing. You took all the interior pores and the exterior surface, the surface area would cover over 100 acres. That's 1/4 of a mile by 1/2 a mile. That's how porous activated carbon is.
Okay.
So that's why it's so absorptive. And when they make activated carbon is not like, you go out and you have a fire pit, and that's, the charred wood that's ash laying in your fire pit. Activated carbon is actually taking nutshells or wood or whatever and heating it to 1450 degrees while under pressure. That's how activated carbon is created. So when people talk about deactivating or reactivating, that's the wrong term, because to reactivate any carbon once it's been used, to reactivate it back to its pristine state where there's no molecules in it, you have to do the same process. You have to heat it to 1450 degrees under pressure. But for hunting purposes, you're not trying to totally reactivate it. Hunting purposes, you don't need that much porosity. You can fill some of those pores and still have plenty left for hunting purposes. So you can take a suit and put it in a household dryer, which is only 140 to 150 degrees, and put it on a highest heat setting for 40 minutes, and it's going to get rid of a lot of those molecules, because the heat energizes not only the carbon, it also energizes the molecules that have bonded to the carbon. And when I say energize, that means the molecules move more rapidly because they get hotter, and the carbon moves more rapidly, so it expands. And the expansion of these two things basically creates a lot of the molecules break free from the bond of the carbon and exit out the dryer. And for people that can't quite understand what that means, if you look at, probably everybody knows, has heard of the Mackinac Bridge, or any expansion bridge for that matter, or concrete highways, or big steel building structures that are steel frames. They all have expansion joints in them. And why do they have expansion joints in them? Because when it gets 80, 90 degrees on sunny days, the steel or the concrete in the highways, they energize, and the molecules move faster, and they get bigger, and basically it makes the steel or the concrete expand, and that's why there's expansion joints. The molecules and the carbon work in exactly the same manner. It doesn't take a ton of temperature for that to start happening and to break free a lot of that molecules from the actual carbon.
Man, I feel like I'm back in middle school science class here.
Well, I studied all this stuff. I don't just do stuff for the heck of it. I like to know the technologies before I talk about them, and I researched all this 20 years ago. Found out how many different worldwide bodies and governmental bodies and industries worldwide use activated carbon. You research all this other stuff that hunting companies are spewing, and trust me, none of them get used anywhere near what activated carbon does in other processes around the world.
Dan, how do you feel about using activated carbon for eliminating human odors?
Here's the thing with carbon suits. Where it first came from, that technology is cadaver bags to eliminate the scent of rotting bodies. That's where it first came from. They can only use it once because they put the body in there and it clogs up all the carbon. And they can't reactivate it because it has to be fired to a temperature of at least 350 degrees in order to reactivate the carbon to clear out the little holes in the molecules. So you can't reactivate it, and it clogs up. You get like one use out of it. And besides that, air breathes through it. It's not a rubber suit. Some scent gets through. It's not 100%. I mean, maybe it's, 90% or 95%. I mean, they'll probably tell you it's 99.9%, but it's not. If air gets through it, scent gets through it. And I can tell you this, I've been around guys that fart in them and you can smell it. So
I can attest to that. I was in the military. I was in the military in Iraq with chem suits, and yes, you can smell them.
All right.
You're right. So some odor does get through.
It does.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears on you here a little bit. Obviously, your website and your videos have a ton of information on this, but maybe can you give us an idea of generally how you hunt mature deer?
How I hunt them is I find where they're bedding. I either know it from pre-scouting or I take an educated guess on where I think they're bedding. And I get as close as possible. Most of the time I know where the bedding is. And I'm usually in swamp terrain hunting 50 to 75 yards from the bedded buck. There's been times when they stand up out of their bed and I shoot them. You might have seen that YouTube video where I sneak up the tree. I think it's hunt number 2 or something on my Extreme Whitetail Tactics videos.
Okay. I'm sure I've seen it.
I climb up that tree. That deer's bedded. I can see it in its bed. And I sneak up there, set up a tree stand, climb into that tree stand, and I shoot it when it gets up. I mean, it walked a little bit. I mean, I think it walked 10 yards before I shot it. But that's the kind of hunting I'm doing. Close quarters, getting in close. And I feel like you have to if you're hunting pressured animals. So, a lot of the times I shoot these deer right at the edge of closing time, and I'm watching them get out of their bed. If you're 200 yards back, you're 150 yards too far. So that's my logic for hunting them.
Okay. Well, there's certainly a lot of proof in the pudding where it's worked out for you.
Killed the buck. Nobody else got him.
John, so we talked to Dan Infalt before we talked to you. We're interviewing him as well. And he actually kind of takes a reverse strategy, and he actually uses his scent to try to control where the deer are going to be moving over time. So I'll kind of give you an idea what he talked about is actually going through areas that he knows mature deer may be using and systematically using that to push them out of the area over time. So he might hunt a spot and then he's not going to hunt that anymore. And he said if he knows deer are bedding in an area he can't hunt because of the wind most likely, he'll actually go through that area not even planning to hunt it, just trying to stink it up. Do you see any advantage of you actually using a scent as opposed to trying to get rid of it?
I think that's the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life.
I gotta tell you, it sounded real good when Dan was explaining it.
I'll tell you what. I've hunted public lands for 53 years, and I hunt in Michigan. I know Wisconsin has a lot of hunters, but it's not nearly as their public lands aren't nearly as pressured as ours. But one thing about public land, from what I understand about Dan, and I don't know Dan. I mean, until I talked to you, I'd never even heard of the man. But from what I understand, how somebody can go in during postseason and find a mature buck bed blows my mind, because I know during postseason in Wisconsin, just as in Michigan, by January, February, and March, the deer have changed their patterns. I mean, their deer have moved down into lower ground. They've typically moved closer to preferred feeding locations for the winter. They're on a primary feeding to bedding area routine. So finding where a supposed mature buck would bed during postseason would be pretty much irrelevant to where that buck would be bedding during the deer season, because they totally have changed. And also on public lands, there's minimum 15 does, fawns, and subordinate bucks to every 3.5-year-old buck. So the buck to doe, or the other deer to mature buck ratio, is probably 15 or 20 to 1. So how you can enter and get close to a buck bed, because typically bucks bed deeper into the bedding area than the other deer, especially during season when they've had preseason scouting pressure and some early season hunting pressure. Bigger bucks typically bed deeper into the security cover. So how you can get within 100 yards of a mature buck without spooking other deer that are bedding peripherally around there, and when you spook them, if you're walking towards where the big buck's bedded, that's the direction they're going to run. And if they're running that direction or spooking that direction, he's going to hear that, and he's not going to get up till after dark, or he's sure not going to get up and go back in that direction that the deer were spooking from. So there's a lot of things that I struggle with. I'm not saying he's not doing it, but in all my years of experience hunting public lands and pressured areas, I struggle with a lot of the concepts.
Yeah, well, the cool thing is you guys have both been extremely successful with it. So there's, obviously there's ways to figure out each one of the strategies and make it work. We did ask Dan about that because I had talked to you about it before. He basically said, yeah, I spook deer. It was, they spook and, he tries not to. But that's not, he doesn't let that ruin the hunt for him. And I guess he maybe does it early enough.
He can't make that choice if that ruins the hunt for him. If you spook deer and they run by the buck you're trying to kill, that ruins the hunt.
Yeah.
Whether you want it to or not, that ruins the hunt. That buck's not going to get up and go out in the direction the deer that are spooking from came from. That's just not going to happen. Not in a pressured area. It ain't going to happen. And another thing that I found interesting was how in a public area you can hunt a supposed mature buck bed 2 or 3 times and then move to another one. There's not that many mature bucks in pressured areas. To go in and find 15 or 20 different mature buck beds during postseason and then hunt them accordingly in the season. I don't know how in the world anybody would ever find 10 or 15 mature buck beds during postseason that would have anything to do with where they would be bedding during season.
Dan, okay, so going back to your tactics some, with just playing the wind, how do you control maybe deer that move downwind to your location that aren't, say, your target deer in let's say you're hunting a particular bedding area, maybe there's some other deer downwind or while you're accessing your stand. How do you control those things?
Well, I do my best to not have the wind go to areas I don't want it to go to. Like you're implying, sometimes that's not possible. Mm-hmm. Deer spooking doesn't really bother me. That usually, the only thing that bothers me is if a deer spooks and it just keeps spooking, which don't happen very often, but every now and then you get one that does. That annoys me. But most of the time, if a deer spooks and leaves, it doesn't even seem to bother bucks. I've jumped satellite deer and ran them right through a bedding area and climbed up the tree and hunted anyways and had a buck get up an hour later right where that deer would run through and walk right to me. That's not to say that there hasn't been a few times when you spook a deer through there and the buck gets up and runs off with them. But you're going to have deer that spook no matter how you go in there. Even if you think you can stop them from smelling you, you're still going to have deer spook. They're going to hear you or see you or whatever. That's just part of the game.
I got one more question based off that. And I don't know that I've ever heard you say this, but you probably have on some of your videos. What if you are in your tree stand and the wind takes the wrong direction? You know your wind is headed right for where a buck is bedded. What do you do in that situation? Do you get up and move and just get out of there? Or you just set it through and hope for the best?
Well, I'm going to contradict myself here because years ago, and I might have even said this in some of my early videos, I used to say, the wind changes, you leave. But at this point in the game right now, I would tell you that if you're in the tree already and the wind changed directions, it's too late anyways. Ride it out and see what happens. I would not go set up someplace on purpose because of the wind being wrong. But if the wind switched on me, I'd stay there.
John, so I'm curious how you got to the point of activate. I understand you did some research and got into activated carbon. What did you try before that? Was that a process of getting more and more involved in scent elimination before you started using scent lock?
Oh, yeah. I tried everything. Back, I don't know, it was probably in the 80s that Scent Shield came out with their sprays, and, I used that. And I used to wear rubber hats, like women shower caps to keep my hair odor down. When I was hunting, and they were terrible because they were just really, really hot. But
I bet you looked really cool, though.
Shower caps. Yeah, I'm sure I looked really cool.
A guy's a hardcore hunter when you see him wear a shower cap.
Well, yeah, I don't do it anymore since I'm using carbon. But
yeah,
and I don't like to just say, I don't like to say Scent Lock because a Scent Lock is a brand. I like people to think of it as activated carbon. I'm using activated carbon line garments. Scent Lock just happens to have the patent on it. Activated carbon is the technology.
Dan, have you ever tried any scent control products or anything like that, or have you always just hunted the wind?
Okay, I tried some scent control products. I didn't take it to the extreme, though. And all the extremists say that that's why it didn't work for me. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's because I didn't take it to the absolute extreme. And I think that's kind of a blanket excuse in my eyes of, well, it failed for you because you don't do it right kind of thing.
Right.
But I sprayed myself down. I wore rubber boots and washed, cleaned, and I tried that for a few years, and I saw absolutely no difference. As a matter of fact, I think maybe I even got busted more. So getting into that a little bit, I had a lot of friends in hunting and a lot of professional hunting friends. And I know guys that go to the anal extremes. Some still do. And a lot of them have quit doing it now. And the ones that have quit doing it came to realization that it was making absolutely no difference. And those guys did take it to the absolute extreme. I mean, to the point of covering their mouths so that they're breathing through activated carbon, where the only thing showing is their eyes, taping their sleeves in their gloves and taping their pant legs, and, just the absolute extreme, watching their diet. I mean, that doesn't even sound fun to me. And, it still didn't work. They still got busted continuously. And as a matter of fact, they got busted a lot because they had this misconception that they could get away with a little more. So they were probably getting busted more than me. And, they'd come up, you hear these things like they'll say, well, I had this deer, it was right downwind of me. Granted, the last two busted, but this one was right downwind of me and didn't smell me. And, I look at them and I'm like, I have deer downwind of me all the time and I'm wearing work clothes. I got oily boots on and they don't smell me. I've had deer walk in, I'm dropping milkweed and it's bouncing off them. That deer, I know he can smell me. It doesn't even react, doesn't show reaction. I have that happen all the time. Then you have the occasional deer that don't tolerate it.
John, what are your thoughts on that?
I've written articles on this many times, and it just bothers me that people buy something and try it, and I don't, I don't blame people. I honestly don't blame hunters because the information out there on proper care instructions, I bet 50% of the time when I talk to hunters, they wash their suits. Instead of just deabsorbing them in a dryer, they wash them in a washing machine. And what that does over time is it breaks down the glue that's actually holding the two fabrics together that are sandwiching the carbon, breaks down the glue, and you lose a huge percentage of your carbon. So it creates areas in the suit where there's no carbon, so obviously you're going to get permeated odor go through there.
Do you hand wash your suit when it gets dirty, or?
I don't. I may wash a suit every other year.
Mm-hmm.
No, I get it dirty. I fall in the mud once in a while. I'm old. I do a lot of seminars. I do seminars at the Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan deer expos, and a lot of other stuff. Hopefully this year I can do the Illinois one. And when I'm doing seminars, I always ask people, and I always ask people, okay, how many people in here are using or have used an activated carbon line suit? And back years ago, Scent Blocker used to also use activated carbon, but they used to pay huge, almost $1 million in royalties to ScentLock a year, because ScentLock has the exclusive patent on using activated carbon in hunting garments. So they were paying a lot of money to ScentLock, and that's why they ended up switching to something different, which
a lot of money in camo. If they're giving away $1 million, and I guess they did end up going out of business, so maybe it didn't work out so well for them. But
licensing fees, it was about $800,000 a year in licensing fees that they had to pay to ScentLock to use activated carbon in their suits.
Wow.
But anyway, so I always ask people, how many people are using or have used ScentLock, and quite a few hands go up, or Scent Blocker. And then I always ask, well, how many of you have been winded? And typically, I'd say half of the people that had their hands up that had used it, their hands went back up when I asked how many people have been winded. And then I get a little deeper, because a lot of people think when you buy an activated carbon line suit, you got a magic bullet. And that is just so not the case. I mean, if it's not cared for properly and everything else done in conjunction with it, it's no better than just a permeable cotton suit. So, I delve a little deeper. Now, most of them are wearing rubber or, neoprene muck boots or something like that. But quite a few of them were wearing new rubber boots. And anytime you wear new rubber boots, there's a pretty strong rubber odor. And if you're hunting mature deer, especially mature buck in a pressured area, any foreign odor is very negative to your success. Because if a mature buck's coming in, if you're hunting in a destination location, and he gets wind of something that's foreign, almost every mature buck I've ever killed in Michigan has had multiple wounds on his body. So they've been there, done that, and anything foreign odor alters their mindset, and more than likely they are not going to commit to come in, even if it's a destination primary scrape area or an apple tree or a white oak or whatever. So that was one thing that quite a few of them did. They didn't have clean rubber boots. They didn't leave their boots outside for like 2 years before they'd wear them. But a lot of them also didn't have a drop-down face mask. 40% of your odor comes out of your head. Your hair follicles, when you take a shower in the morning, your hair is nice and clean. By nighttime, it's oily. There is so much bacteria and odor that's coming out of your hair follicles that it's unreal. And people watch these TV guys, and even the guys that sound like sponsors, they pay them a lot of money to sponsor their TV shows. I've never, ever in my life seen one TV or video hunter that had a scent control regimen that I think was adequate. They might wear a scent lock jacket. They might have rubber boots. They usually have scent lock pants. They might have scent lock gloves, but they never wash their backpack, and they almost always wear some logo ball cap with their hair hanging out, and a lot of them have beards and face paint on their face. Any one of those things totally blows your scent control regimen. You've got to do it all or do... I'm not going to say you got to do it all or do nothing, because even if you wore the jacket and the pack, it's going to help. But, to me, I want to be at 96 to 99%. So anyway, when I ask people, how many people here use a backpack? Almost all of the same people raise their hand. Everybody uses a backpack or a fanny pack. Okay, how many of you guys wash your backpack regularly in scent-free detergent and store your backpack in an airtight container just as you would your scent lock suit? Not one hand goes up. Nobody does that. So you get into your backpack every day with your bare hands, and then you take it up and put it in the tree with you. You got this huge human scent wick in the tree with you. And then if you get winded, even if you're doing everything else right, what do? You blame it on your suit. So, it's not an... It's kind of an all or nothing. If you want to totally negate wind direction, it's an all or nothing situation. If you want to get to the point, where if you just wear a jacket and a pants and it helps your scent by, absorbing 50% of your body odor because you're letting 40% come out of your hair, and then you're going to have a stinky backpack. That may help a little bit, but you still better pay attention to the wind.
Dan?
I mean, you're looking at more people use scent control now, and more people believe in scent control than don't. But look at how well I'm doing on public land. I would say the only person rivaling me is John. Mm-hmm. And look at how well Andre's done. He's got more Boone and Crockett's than anybody else in the world if you put him in the books. I think he has 8 now, and he has like 4 or 5 within a couple inches that missed. And there's nobody else in the world that's done that. And he wears leather boots everywhere he hunts. And he hunts with blue jeans and just regular street clothes. He likes to wear olive drabs and stuff. He doesn't like camo. Now, how is it, if scent control is so important, that the guy who has the most Boone and Crockett's in the world doesn't use it? I mean, if that's so important, you'd think somebody that uses it would get that claim to fame for him. And you'd think somebody like myself, heck, I must be a hell of a hunter if I don't need scent control, right? In actuality, you got to be a hell of a hunter to kill big bucks, because you have to understand how they move and stuff. You also have to look at who's telling you this crap. And I'm not downplaying John. I'm talking about the industry in general. Mm-hmm. Who's telling you that you need to use scent control? It ain't scientists, even though they want to tell you that. Anybody that's calling themselves a scientist in the scent control industry is working for the scent control industry. It's like a defense lawyer telling you how innocent his client is. Mm-hmm. It's not the truth. I can tell you, working in the hunting industry, that when I started out, going to shows with Andre and doing all this stuff, I was getting a lot of attention because of the bucks I was shooting back then in a time frame when people weren't shooting big bucks. And I would boldly say, I don't use scent control. I don't believe in that crap. And I can remember a lot of really well-known outdoor hunters that are still really well-known that used to hang out with me and Andre at the booths and stuff and after the shows that would tell us and tell me, you can't say things like that. You're going to need those companies because when you have a show later on or you're working in a TV show, you can't even be sponsored. That show won't even want you on there because you've made statements like that. You're going to need that money from scent control because you got to get money from everybody in the industry. You got to get money from a camouflage guy. You have to have a sponsorship there. You have to have a sponsorship from for scent control clothing. You got to have scent control spray. You got to have a certain trail camera. Blah blah blah. And these guys would tell me that they don't believe it at all, but they have to tote that line if they want to pay for their show. And those people are still out there, still saying how much it works, still spraying themselves down at the beginning of every show. I'm not going to throw them under the bus and tell you who they are, but they're well-known, famous people that told me straight out they don't use it. One of them, a little off track, but kind of the same direction, he would come to the booth and Andre would give him a really good deal on tree stands, and he'd buy 10 tree stands for him and his whole pro staff, but Andre wouldn't sponsor them. So they'd shoot the deer out of the Lone Wolf tree stands, and then they'd video them in the tree stand that they were sponsored by. And the guy would sit in the booth and tell us how rickety and clanky and noisy these tree stands were, and they'd sit on the TV show and tell you how great they are. These are the people that are telling you that you have to have scent control and how well it works.
John, why Scent Lock? Because there's a lot of choices out there, and you're a very outspoken advocate for Scent Lock. What is it about Scent Lock that is the reason you decided to go with them and promote them so much?
Because Scent Lock they have the patent on using activated carbon, and activated carbon is the most absorbent substance known to man. So they have the best technology. Scent Blocker was using something called Trinity, which was a synthetic absorbent, and Scent Lock had sent suits to Rutgers University and tested it, and theirs was 26% absorptive capacity of a Scent Lock suit, and Under Armour was only 5%. They use zeolite, which is basically a form of volcanic ash.
What's your relationship with Scent Lock? Are you paid by them, or what's the deal with Scent Lock?
I endorse Scent Lock because it works.
Okay.
Period. I don't endorse anybody if it doesn't work. When I did my DVDs, I had several companies want me to use their stuff, and then they were going to pay me to endorse it, and I don't do that. That's not me. I only endorse stuff that works. I've got a good relationship with Scent Lock. I'm on their pro staff. I get my suits for free from them, but I do not get paid by them. And even if I did not get my suits for free, I would still endorse their product and talk about it because I like hunters to be more successful.
John, I was going to ask if you're aware of any other hunters that are using the same scent control regimen and actually having the type of success that you are, or is the average hunter not able to go through with all the things?
Actually. Yeah. Quite a few. I just had my last workshop, and one of the 4 guys, he doesn't pay any attention to the wind. My son Chris obviously doesn't. My son John doesn't pay any attention to wind direction. And I've had quite a few other friends or people that have emailed me. I mean, if you looked on my website and you went to the testimonial page, there's quite a few testimonials of guys even 10 years ago that started using my scent control regimen, and they sent me pictures of 2 or 3 mature bucks, and they'd never killed a buck over 1.5 years old before, and they attributed it to their scent control regimen not getting winded.
Yeah, we'll make sure to put a link to that.
I can tell almost when I'm talking to people if they're going to be willing to do the due diligence to actually incorporate it. Some people just would rather say something doesn't work because they don't want to make the effort to see if it actually does work.
Well, that's going to be it for part 1 of our 3-part series. The next couple of parts are still going to have a ton of really good content in them. We are going to talk about dog studies. We use drug dogs to test scent elimination. We're going to talk about the lawsuit against ScentLock. We're going to see how both of these guys feel about other products that are used for scent elimination and what some of their other strategies are. And we're also going to hear some success stories from both of them. So lots of really good stuff to come. I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as I am. And if you are, share it with your friends. Share it on social media. You can get a link to it on downsouthhunting.com if you want to get a link to put up. And also, I'd suggest start a thread on whatever forums you're active in, and just get a discussion going with some of your friends and see what they think as well. I'm sure there'll be a thread on the Hunting Beast if you want to hear what Dan has to say about it so far. I'm sure he'll be talking about it, and I think John's active on some Michigan Sportsman's forums as well, so you might want to keep an eye out for him and get some of the feedback of what they have had to say as well. So look out for part 2 coming out next week, and please subscribe, and also if this is something you enjoyed, give us a review. We'd appreciate it. Finally, check out huntinggeardeals.com. They've got links to the best deals, sales, specials, and coupon codes from across the web on everything from tree stands to camo, boots, whatever you need for your upcoming hunting seasons. That's www.huntinggeardeals.com. Thanks, and we're out down south.